how's it going? Gukil here for Diablo 3 Season 6. We are 1 week away from the end of Season 5, and with that being said, I'm now going to start digging into Season 6 and really looking at some of the builds that Demon Hunters specifically are going to be using for the upcoming season. Now, you might notice that I have my inventory open and I have an Unhallowed Essence set. That's right, we're going to be talking about Unhallowed Essence once again. I've talked about it in Season 5 as well as Season 4, and if you've watched those videos or you've played Unhallowed Essence in the past, you're going to be looking at the screen and going, what's different? It doesn't look like anything has changed. Well, as far as gear choices, as far as skill choices, yeah, not much has changed, but the big changes that have happened for Unhallowed Essence have to do with the set bonuses and how they've been changed and buffed to really optimize the power of the set and really put it through the roof in popularity as far as the PTR goes. Now, the 4 set's been changed to gain 60% damage reduction and deal 60% increased damage for 8 seconds if no enemy is within 10 yards of you. That's a 20% buff to damage reduction as well as increased damage. And for our 6th set, your generators, multi-shot, and vengeance deal 40% increased damage for every point of discipline that you have, which is a 20% boost from last season. But the thing to really kind of keep in mind here is that it's a 20% boost on every single point of discipline that we have equipped to our character. Those 2 changes alone have made the set that is exactly the same as it was in Season 5 now be optimal in power compared to Martyrs, for example, has taken a big step off for solo Greater Rift farming, as well as Natalia's has really seen it kind of bottom out now as more of a niche thing that players who like Natalia's can still use, but it's not as popular on the leaderboards. So for those of you who have played Unhallowed Essence in the past, what I'm going to say in the rest of this video is probably going to be a lot of stuff you've already heard, or if you want to keep listening, it's just going to be a refresher. But for those who are new, I'm going to go in and break down exactly what set pieces and what legendary pieces you need to have in order to make this the most optimal build that you could possibly make it for Diablo 3 Season 6. So the first thing that we're going to get into is the actual 6 set itself. You need to make sure that you have all 6 pieces of the set equipped to your character in order to really maximize its damage. You're not going to get the same damage out of the UE set if you're putting a Royal Ring of Grandeur onto a ring slot or into your Kanai's Cube. You're going to be missing out on 2 major damage bonuses that we really want to have equipped. So make sure that you have all 6 pieces equipped. And the statistics you're going to be focusing on are mainly making sure that you have as many sockets as you can on your gear if you do have it. So if you have legs, make sure that you have 2 sockets. If you have chest, make sure you have 3 sockets. And then for the rest of the gear, making sure that you strike a balance with getting multi-shot damage, dexterity, vitality, all resistance, and the last slot, making sure that you balance in cooldown reduction. Now, I personally recommend having cooldown reduction on your shoulders, on your gloves, and then also on your quiver. But there could be some flexibility based on some of the statistics you get on your bow or onto your rings, for example. But that's primarily what you want to focus on. I'll hover quickly over just some of the choices that I have. The helm is kind of a wishy-washy thing. If you don't want to have dexterity, crit hit chance, and multi-shot damage on your helm, you'd rather have the vitality. That's perfectly okay. With the damage boosts that have been gotten for multi-shot with the 6 set now, I would say that having that 15% multi-shot is probably not going to put you that much over the edge. You might really miss that possibly 1000 vitality on your helm. However, if you really like min-maxing damage, that's going to be the role to go for you. Your chest piece, you want to obviously make sure that you have dex, vitality, resist all, and 3 sockets. Your shoulders, you want to make sure that you have dex, vitality, resist all, and have cooldown on your shoulders. For your gloves, having crit hit damage, crit chance, cooldown, and dexterity. Pants, dex, vit, resist all, 2 sockets. And then for your boots, ideally, optimally, you want to have all resistance in place of movement speed, but it's all about what you can get the most out of the gear that you find. And for me, I haven't found an ancient set of boots that have all resist on it, so this is what I'm rolling with, and you could balance around that. For your rings, focus and restraint once again are king this season. Not a lot's changed there. Make sure that you have a socket, you have crit hit damage and crit hit chance on your rings. Find some way to roll it that way. Make sure that that is absolutely what you have. If you're lucky enough, you're going to be able to find a focus and restraint that give you the ability to have crit hit damage, crit hit chance, a socket, and have something in place of your main stat. In that situation, that's where you can get kind of creative with your gear, as long as you are maintaining what we need for the build, which is about 38% cooldown reduction, so that we have 100% 100% uptime on Vengeance. As long as you maintain that in some form, what you decide to do with that extra stat is up to you. Area damage is very, very powerful if you're able to maximize it, or you could just continue to do what you're doing with your main stat if that's the way that you choose to go. It's all up to you, but make sure at the minimum you have crit hit damage, crit hit chance, and a socket. You need to make sure that you have a Yang's recurve for your bow, because the secondary legendary effect is not going to get any better. Multi-shot attacking 50% faster is not something that you're going to be able to find a replacement for. Ideally, you want to make sure that it rolls with at least percent damage on it in some way, dexterity, and making sure absolutely that you have a socket. Now, this bow, if it looks like it has a lot of stats to you, it's because it does, because I've added a Ramalandi's gift onto this one. If you're unlucky and you haven't found a Ramalandi's gift, then I would make sure that if you find an Ancient Yang's recurve, just stash it away. Don't get fancy with rolling a socket because you want that power right now. It's better off to save until you find a Ramalandi's gift later on in the season. And for your Quiver, Dead Man's Legacy, again, with the multi-shot bonus, hitting enemies below a percent range of health twice, it's not going to get better than that. And again, with your Quiver, this is where you can kind of get creative with the stats. For mine, I was able to find a Quiver that had Dexterity, Vitality, Attack Speed, Crit Hit Chance, and as well give me the ability to roll cooldown, which is what keeps me at that cooldown breakpoint. But you're not always going to be that fortunate to find something like this, or heck, you might be more fortunate and find something even better than this. It's up to you to get creative with the statistics to make sure that you maintain that cooldown breakpoint as well as maximize damage rolls on other pieces of gear. Now, I just need to take a second to say this because I see this all the time in the community chats for Demon Hunters. I see it on Reddit when people are linking their Yang's recurves or Dead Man's Legacy. They're excited. They just got that new awesome ancient piece of gear and they can't wait to show off to everybody. And then chuckles start to go throughout the community chats, throughout the boards. There's laughter that goes through everywhere because they can't believe that you didn't notice this one key thing. The secondary on your Dead Man's Legacy, on your Yang's recurve, and on your Cage of the Hellborn need to have plus max discipline as a secondary roll. As we talked about with the 6 set, your generators, multi-shot, and vengeance deal 40% increased damage for every point of discipline that you have. So by you having 0 on that secondary, you are missing out on an absolute boatload of damage that you're not going to be able to get anywhere else. And that's why people are going to be laughing at you in the community chats when you link that item that doesn't have max discipline, and they're wondering how you could have missed that. So you heard it here. Make sure max discipline is on those 3 pieces. Even if it's just a minimum roll of +9 maximum discipline, it's still better than nothing. And if you find a Yang's recurve, if you find a Dead Man's Legacy, or you find a Cage of the Hellborn that doesn't have the ability to roll to max discipline, unfortunately, it's pretty much as good as trash. It's not going to work out. You can maybe use it temporarily as you're gearing up in the season, but you're going to want to find a replacement for that right away. The next couple items are up to preference for you, but I believe that these are going to be the best for solo Greater Rift pushing. There is some diversity based on if you want to do it for torment farming, or you may be trying this out in group play, but ultimately I'm focusing on solo play, and this is what's going to be the best for you in solo Greater Rifts. The Witching Hour is the best belt, and why is this the best belt and not Hunter's Wrath, which was very popular in Season 4? Well, the thing is with Hunter's Wrath is that it was really good when we didn't have Vengeance as a 100% uptime cooldown. Now that that has happened, Vengeance being up 100% of the time keeps our hatred churning constantly, which means that we aren't really using our evasive fire skill for anything other than keeping up our focus and restraint buff. So you don't need to have a belt that's solely dedicated to increasing that damage if you're only using it every couple of seconds. Witching Hour is ultimately the best because you're going to attack faster. The critical hit damage roll is going to put your damage through the roof, and you're not going to be able to find any build out there that compares in doing pure damage to this one. And then for your bracers, Wraps of Clarity again come through as the best for Still Martyrs and as well for Unhallowed Essence. Your Hatred Generators reduce your damage taken by 35% for 5 seconds. This times in well with Focus and Restraint for you to keep using your Evasive Fire to maintain this buff. You're not going to get a better damage reduction buff constantly through anything else other than Wraps of Clarity, because you're going to constantly have a 35% damage reduction for 5 seconds all the time. You want to make sure also that you have an elemental damage roll. In this case, we're going to be doing fire. So you want to make sure that you have a fire percent damage roll as well as critical hit chance on this piece of gear. And then lastly, we have the Hellfire Amulet. Optimally, you want to make sure that you have an elemental damage roll 2 on this one. I don't. I only have the dexterity, crit hit damage, crit hit chance, and a socket. Hellfire Amulet is the best in slot, but some other necklaces that do work in this spot are Eye of Elich, or a Haunt of Vaxo, anything that can reliably get you the stats of crit hit damage, crit hit chance, and a socket. This one happened to roll pretty nice as far as a secondary for reduces damage from range attacks, but it's not 100% necessary, but it's nice if you can always find it, because still, as you push higher and higher into Greater Rifts, you'll find that Demon Hunters are still pretty squishy, so it's important to have that down pat. Your legendary gems that are going to make the most sense for this are Bane of the Powerful, Bane of the Trapped, and Zay Stone of Vengeance. All three of those combined for really great synergy as far as dealing damage from a distance, as well as keeping up Bane of the Trapped to get that damage buff against enemies. Now, you might be wondering why we aren't using Taeguk anymore, and unfortunately, I don't even have a Taeguk to... Oh, here we go. So the reason why with Taeguk we are not using this anymore is because you gain 3% increased damage for 1.5 seconds when you spend resource on a channeled skill. So for example, multi-shot would be the case that we're using here. The reason why we're not using this anymore is because it only stacks up to 10 times now. So even if you were really talented with Taeguk and you were able to maintain the stats on it, unfortunately, you're only going to get the benefit up to 10 times, and it doesn't actually end up outweighing the power now of Bane of the Powerful, where you're gaining elite damage passively as well as by keeping your buff up. If we go over to Kanai's Cube for a second, you'll see that things are pretty much the same. We're going to make sure that we have Dawn equipped in our weapon slot to get the passive reduction of cooldown of Vengeance by 65%. Cindercoat ends up taking the spot here for armor, just based on the fact that we are using a fire build. We really don't want to have to worry about hatred regeneration at all, and Cindercoat really adds to that by making sure that our fire skills are reduced by 30% as well. And then Conventional Elements is by far and away your best damage buff, and make sure that you gain 200% increased damage for a single element for 4 seconds, and it rotates. Because Demon Hunters don't have arcane skills or poison skills or holy skills, it's only going to rotate between cold, fire, lightning, and physical, which means that you're going to get the 4-second buff once every 16 seconds, which is pretty frequent. And as part of the skill cap to do with this build, you're going to want to make sure that you're timing when your fire convention of elements comes up by also shooting a huge spray of multi-shot at the time. So to recap, make sure that you have your 6 set, make sure you have your Yang's Recurve, your Dead Man's Legacy, and make sure that you have your max discipline on your cage, your bow, as well as your Dead Man's Legacy. Make sure you have Wraps of Clarity, Witching Hour, and an amulet that has crit hit damage, crit hit chance, and a socket in some form. If you can get the elemental damage, great. Make sure you maintain that cooldown reduction breakpoint of 38%. That's going to make sure that your Vengeance is up 100% of the time. And then also make sure in your Kanai's Cube you have Dawn, Cindercoat, and Conventional Elements. When we get into skills, the skills remain pretty much the same as they did from the last couple of seasons. You're going to be alternating between Evasive Fire and Multi-Shot Arsenal as your main damage skills. You're going to be keeping Seethe up for Vengeance 100% of the time, so that you constantly have that hatred boost. You're going to be using Vault Tumble so that your next vault within 6 seconds has its discipline cost reduced. This one is a little bit of a point of contention for people who don't see that Tumble is also able to be used in the same way as Trail of Cinders. For me, Trail of Cinders, it doesn't really do any difference now that we're not using a Calamity in the main weapon slot, where you could use Trail of Cinders to apply Marked for Death, but now we're just going to be using Tumble. We have Preparation and Invigoration to make sure that we constantly have a maximum discipline increase of 20, which synergizes well with our 6-set bonus. And we're going to be using Companion Wolf, which passively summons a wolf companion that attacks enemies in front of them, which is great, but what we actually need it for is the active ability, which is it will give you a 30% increased damage buff for 10 seconds on a 30-second cooldown. That is a lot of uptime, and that's a lot of damage you want to make sure you're maximizing on. Our passive skills are going to be Ballistics, because we're going to constantly be shooting out rockets from our multi-shot, which is going to have 100% damage increase on those rockets. And as well, every time we deal damage, we're going to have a chance to deal another rocket in damage. We're going to have ambush to deal 40% additional damage to enemies above 75% health. This works really well in torment farming when mobs don't have that much health. You let off that initial spray of multi-shot, it takes a huge chunk of their health off, and then once they get below 60%, bam, dealing double damage with Dead Man's Legacy. You're maybe almost one-shotting things. For Greater Rift solo, I like to use Leech, but if you're just doing Torment, you can also switch this to Tactical Advantage for movement speed. And then Thrill of the Hunt, this is going to be the way that we apply our chill on enemies so that we keep up Bane of the Trapped, which is a huge damage boost. But in this slot, if you were just running Torment farming, then I would recommend using Blood Vengeance. That pretty much covers Unhallowed Essence, guys. If you have any questions, make sure that you comment below, and I'll do my best to answer everything. Hopefully, I've covered off everything. It's going to be a fun season if you've enjoyed playing Unhallowed Essence the last 2 seasons. Demon Hunters are looking to be a lot of fun. In the next video, I'm going to cover off how Demon Hunters are going to be able to fit into support gameplay and what abilities you're going to use, as well as what pieces of gear you're going to use to really contribute to pushing on the group Greater Rift leaderboards. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you on the next video.